Sorry.
Okay, so on 46, on the right side, bottom of the page, where it says inner dimensions, we did everything but this final inner dimension. So I'm going to mute all just any background noise and unmute yourselves if you'd like to speak. Okay, so the inner dimensions is a Kabbalistic one. And before we get into it, because this is we're getting into territory that we don't usually make forays into Kabbalistic, such straight up Kabbalistic ideas on your average Tuesday. So I want to look at it this way. Good morning, Donna. First of all, we had mentioned these are all about offerings, and the offerings are the book of Leviticus is a large part of it is about the offerings, and we're trying to we've never done these as us in our lives, and we didn't experience it because we weren't around when the temple stood. But the concepts are still very important, but they are going to generally be somewhat more abstract or detached from us. And trying to get into the part that remains relevant, I guess, kind of like what we were talking about before with Tisha B'Av. So this one is about a Thanksgiving offering. Now, Thanksgiving, that we can all relate to that, because we don't relate to the offering part, but the idea of saying thank you and feeling gratitude. Now, the gratitude, when we speak about gratitude for God, or hopefully gratitude to someone special in our lives, it's not the same as, walking into ShopRite later and someone holds open a door for me and say thank you. That's correct. That's polite. I do thank them, but I'm not thankful to that person necessarily. I don't know their name and so on. So when you talk about thankfulness, Torah-wise, it's a deeper, much more a full-hearted. When we're talking about certainly towards God and even towards special people in our lives, it's really the idea of recognizing that there's someone who is, or in God's case, is some being to whom we owe. We owe thanks for this morning, something good happened to us. But if we're going to be a little bit more sophisticated about it, a little bit broader minded about it, it's not just that I got up this morning and say, wow, I left my eyes open and I can see. I do want to be thankful to God for that. But it's about God, that God is there for me, even things I don't know about and things I don't necessarily need right now, or know that I need right now, that God is that person in my life. So in the way, or that being in my life, are the people, obviously, our loved ones are not God either, but the sense of appreciation and gratitude, the word itself is related to the word for humility or surrender. In other words, recognizing that there's someone special in our lives. It's not just about the potato kugel in front of us, the door held open for us, the whatever it went on now. It's thankfulness for who you are, not only what you've done. So in that sense, and I think I mentioned last week, the Talmud says that offerings many of the offerings, or most of the offerings, will be suspended in the time of Mashiach, because they're situational, and a lot of them have to do with mistakes we've made and so on. Those situations are not going to happen in a better society. But the point of the Talmud is that even though most of the offerings will be suspended, the idea of the Thanksgiving offering will continue, because the idea of us feeling surrendered and totally appreciative of God is only going to increase. It's not going to decrease at the time of Mashiach, because we're not going to have the distractions we usually have. And therefore, that's something that is only going to gain steam, so to speak. Again, thinking about the Thanksgiving as the idea of not only thanking the benefactor for what they've done, but for who they are. So having said that, the inner dimensions that they've chosen here. Again, it's Kabbalistic, but let's try to get something out of this. It says, in order to give thanks, because this is the idea of the Thanksgiving offering. In Kabbalistic terms, the purpose of the sacrifices, the offerings, is to elevate the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya to the level of the world of Atzilut. I want to just stop that right there. And I think we've done this perhaps some other times in trying to explain some stuff of Kabbalah, but I'm going to here. I just found this on the internet and I didn't put it together, but it'll work for what we're doing. I didn't make these. I didn't do these translations, and I wouldn't. I'm not wed to them either. But these are what Kabbalah calls four worlds. Now, four worlds doesn't mean our world and then, Mars and Pluto. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about world it's really an idea, a framework for living, and a framework for how we see the world, how we relate to the world, how we perceive the world, how we approach the world. So, if we look at the world in which we live, the room you're in, on the one hand, it's a room. It has sheetrock, it has wallpaper, carpet, hardwood floor, whatever it is. These are very tactile and very functional things. Now, and that's the way we're hardwired to feel, and it's true. The world, what you see around you, the computer you're looking at is very real. Now, in engaging the world, even if you look at the world around you, you perceive the world around you, you can see in it, in your mind's eye, at a minimum, you can see it in other things too. You can see in it the fact that that room or that house means something to you as far as your family. It's something you're grateful for because God has blessed you with the ability to have it. And so there are ways of looking at things in a very tactile, frontal way, and sometimes seeing something beneath the surface in a non-spiritual sense. If one hears a person hears news this morning, if I heard on the news something about problems with shipping lanes in the Middle East, it's a factoid that's probably going to go in and out of my brain pretty quickly. To someone well versed and understanding of in global economics, and especially in, let's say, oil commodities, it's going to mean something much deeper, because they're going to be able to see what this means on a global scale and what repercussions, perhaps, or even repercussions it might have in their own town, in their gas station. We see in things not only what they are on the surface, but when we have a more cultivated and the sophisticated depth of our approach, we're going to see levels that maybe some people don't have that sophistication or training are able to see. So when it comes to spiritually training, we live in God's world, and ideally a person Atzilut, they translate it as archetypes. I'm not going to disagree with it. I mean, from an angle, but the very word Atzilut, and again, these are Kabbalistic terms. The foundational, the Hebrew word of it, which is the basis of the word, is Eitzel, and Eitzel means close. And to a person who perceives the world through the lens and lives a world in Atzilut, always can sensually and palpably feel the godliness in the world around them. Yes, it's a computer. Yes, it's a tomato. Yes, it's whatever, a car. These are all part of God's world, and they're all part of my ability to function as God wants me to in God's world. That's a very rarefied way of looking at things. Again, two people looking at the same car, like two people looking at the same or hearing the same tidbit of news, but we're approaching it very differently. And it's not only in our mind's eye necessarily, but it's actually how we're experiencing it. So Atzilut means close, feeling totally close to God, and we're seeing within the world godliness in God's world and God's expression. A level lower than that is called Bria, which means creation. That's fine as a translation. Creation means it exists. It exists as something somewhat independent. So it exists. I'm still conscious of the fact that it's God's world, but I'm not seeing it as just a pure expression of godliness. But this is created. It's a created thing which I understand is plugged into the divine, and therefore it's still very much a godly world. Formation, creation can mean the idea of just the stuff. Like you have the Play-Doh, and then you make the Play-Doh into a bench or a tree. Creation is the stuff, and so it exists. But formation is when we start to get into the more of the nuances of what it is, and that's what takes up our vision. That takes up our brain space. And sure, God. It's God's, even in Yetzirah, it's God's world, but the godliness part of it is taking more of a backseat because what I'm engaging is not only something that exists, but that it means something specific to me. It's a pretzel I like. It's a car, or that it's the car and its design is something that I prefer. And Asiya, final one, the physical, is where, at least it appears to us, just it's what is God. Why is God part of the equation? My car is Ford is part of the equation, and it's steel and whatever it is, and it get me to work, and I got to make sure it functions the way I want to. Maybe yes, I believe in God too, but my car is my car. So these are our four different levels of spiritual sensitivity or divine sensitivity into how we see the world, relate to the world, connect with the world, experience the world. Now, if you're looking at it that way, so what he just said here was the purpose of the offerings, and the purpose of the offerings means not only the offerings, because we don't do the offerings, the purpose of our prayers. Our prayers are a replacement for the offerings. The purpose of our spiritual exercises is to what? To elevate the worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiya to the level of the world of Atzilut. In other words, to elevate these three, 2, 3, and 4, to bring them, to sensitize them, to bring them higher, to connect them with their actual source, which is God. To be able to, this is, Atzilut is experiencing the world in its purity, its godly purity. Again, it's a car, it's an avocado, whatever it is, but we're seeing it fully as its place, as a divine, an expression of divine, of God's creation and its place in God's creation. And we're going to try to plug these lower three into the top, or the higher one. So when we sit and we pray, stand and we pray, we're doing this, we're trying to see ourselves and see our lives and who we are, and imagine ourselves, but see ourselves a deeper self, and see ourselves as God wants us to be, and connect with our souls and connect with our purpose, and try to bring, let's say, these three lower levels into connection with our pure self. One of the things I hadn't sort of doing this before, I would have had it prepared, but the first prayer the Talmud tells us to say in the morning, and we say it not at the very first, but it's very close to the first, is, God, the soul which you have given me is pure. You know, the purity of self, this pure connectedness of God. And it says, you have formed it. No, it says you have created it, which is the same word as this. You have formed it, which is the word of this, and it says you have blown it into me. You invested with me, that you gave me this human persona. And the reason we say that is to recognize our essence is pure, our essence is godly, and God invested it in the human condition, and we want to bring that purity out in our day, in our sense of consciousness. Now, we'll go back to it in a minute because we're going to need more of it. So, the purpose of the sacrifice to elevate the worlds of Bria Tzir, to see it to the level of the world of Atzilut. If there are any questions, you can ask now. Feel free. If not, we'll go a little further. Then the next one is to unite Zeir, Anpin, and Nukva of Atzilut. Okay. Again, this wouldn't have been my choice of what we're going to get into today, although it's good stuff. Let's go to. We spoke about 4 worlds. Here on the left side is what we call 10 Sefirot, or in a way 11 Sefirot. Sefirot are divine expressions, building blocks of creation, building blocks of humanity. They're reflected in our souls. They're within God. That's really the stuff, the DNA of the universe. So, if you think about it in human terms, God's not human, but God created us as a mirror in divine image. So when we understand it within ourselves, we can understand more what's being said about God. So the human personality, the psyche, the conscious human psyche begins with this on the right, Chokhmah. Chokhmah means, they translate it as wisdom. I mean, that's commonly translated that way, but Chokhmah really means the flash of inspiration. It's the beginnings of consciousness. It's where, an idea comes into your mind and you don't know where it came from because it's from the subconscious. So Chokhmah and Bina, these two, are a flash of inspiration, and oops, did that. I didn't mean to make it small. I apologize. I don't know how to get it back. Okay, sorry. Bina is understanding, it's comprehension. So an idea comes to my mind, and then I flesh it out. Those are cognitive, and they're really important, obviously. The cognitive, hopefully, doesn't just stay cognitive, but if an idea comes into my mind, and actually, something, let me try and stop the share and try to start it again. Maybe it'll get a little bigger again. Sorry. No, I don't think so. All right. So those two cognitive ideas, and I didn't get to the top one yet. They translate into feelings. We're thinking today, we're talking today, or something we got up this morning. You're thinking, okay, it's a hot day. I know someone who really can't get out, or still hasn't been getting out for COVID, or whatever it is, and say, something, I don't know if anyone's looking in on him or her. So hopefully that doesn't, sometimes you'll think, we can think things, and that's where it stays as an idea. You thought about it, which is nice. Truthfully, what we want to do is bring those into emotions. And now we start thinking, okay, what can I do about it? So there's 6 emotive attributes that are the engine, really, of what drives us, because we act based on, when our emotions are in gear. Emotions are also where the world touches us. Just in our ideas, and when we're in the world of thought, the world really can't get at us if we're in a purely cognitive place. Feelings is really where we're exposed to the world, where we connect with the world, which is a good thing, but it's where we're exposed to the world. And that's really the engine of what drives us. And the bottom one is called Malchut. Oh, it's back, okay. Malchut means sovereignty, or kingdom, it says whatever. But Malchut also it's seen as feminine. It's the idea of engagement. So if you think about it this way, it's here's an idea, here's the feeling of we should do something, and actually engaging. That's Malchut. Malchut means impacting the world. That's kingdom. It's not, none of us are kings, but we can impact our sphere of influence. We're influencers. That's through our Malchut, and that is seen as a feminine idea, and it's fed often and supported by this is going to see this more as a masculine idea, but the actual impact is going to be what we call Malchut. So to try to understand a little bit of what we're saying before is like this. These two, Chachma and Bina, that's like within the person, that's very personal. You can share your ideas, but it's very much about what's going on inside of me. And I can learn from someone else, but it is as far as how they're treating me and so on. It's really the only my emotions sometimes shape how I see the world, and I'm looking at someone with either rose-colored lenses or dark lenses based on how they've made me feel. But the idea of the that's all an emotional idea getting in the way of this. These are more, and you see they've broken it up, and I think correctly so, into its own idea, its own box here. And Keter is really the self that's beyond the conscious. It's our deeper desires, our deeper values, our deep-seated. This reflects within us the great unknown, and within God, beyond the God, beyond the appreciable interaction with the world. So the way, just like think about this within humans. The greatest function, to be a good functional human being, we need a flow between our deepest values with our understanding, which translates into how we feel and translates into what we do. Sometimes what we're doing is not connected to how we're feeling. That's not good. That's not properly functional. It's a shallow doing, or maybe we're not even recognizing, we're not being self-aware to know what we feel. And what we feel, whether we know it or not, is very connected to how we think. And we want to make sure, like I said before, that it's not our feelings influencing our understanding, but more that we're having a more pristine perception, accurate perception of the reality, and have that guide, not thinking what we feel, but feeling what we think. And then obviously there's the flow from what we call from beyond. So in Torah thinking, one the big in life, what we want to be able to do when we turn to God and what God wants of us, is for us to be able to keep the Malchut connected with its these six attributes, which in Kabbalistic language are known as Zeir Anpin, which God's smaller face. I don't deal with that now, but in the acronym is ZO. I think they said ZO here. Oh, no, this is Zeir Anpin, right? So this it's Aramaic words, which means God's lower way of interfacing. Okay. So I don't know if I'm losing you yet, but and let's just take if I can just step back for a minute and I guess a little bit of a sidebar here. We are now soon approaching a month of pre-Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's called the month of Elul. The month of Elul has as its primary theme a word that we call teshuvah. Teshuvah means return, repentance. And if I thought I was going to go here, I would have drawn something for you. And teshuvah, the founder of Chabad said it can be broken into two words. Toshuv Hey, restore the Hey. Hey is a Hebrew letter. And what he says, because here, these two, there's four letters in God's primary name, a Yud, a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey. These two, this is represented by the Yud, this is represented by the Hey, these six are represented by the Vav, and the Hey, the last Hey, is the final expression, divine communication. But it's not all about God. Because if you ask a teacher, a high school teacher who prepared a class very carefully, or a college teacher, and spoke to students and saw that they're all zoned out or looking at their phones or too tired or whatever. So he asked them, so did you deliver the class? They may say, yeah, I delivered the class, but we did not communicate because I didn't have a recipient. Malchut is not only about God expressing divinity, it's about communication with us. This Malchut means us also. We are part of this. And the physical world is part of this. And Teshuvah means restoring. This is the final Hey. There's brokenness in the world, brokenness within divinity, when there isn't a full flow of all of these elements. And the problem is usually in this final Hey, where the students are not cooperating. And that's us. The physical world is not in sync with its divine flow. So what we hope for is to be able to plug the world as represented here into this higher flow, so that the world is not disconnected from the divine. And there's a Kabbalistic prayer that it's said in our prayers, and it's been since the times of the Talmud. Before doing a mitzvah, say that this is in order to unify the divine and the God, the Holy One, and the Shechina. Shechina means this. Shechina means this lower thing, is that we bring godliness, God's world into full connection. If God is God, but we're part of the divine flow. And if we're not connected to God, God is deficient. And so therefore, this, in order for everything to be what we're going to call highly functional, we need to be in line with all of this. So in that sense, this is what we said here, in order to give thanks, is to unite. The purpose of the offerings, the purpose of our lives, is to unite the Zeir Ampin, which, as I said, those are the six, and Nukva, which means the feminine in Aramaic. As I said, this is feminine, and the unit. And Nukva Vatsilos within God's perfect level of reality. So that's what our job is. And I'm sorry if I got a little too esoteric, but help me unpack that for you if you will. Today, as we go through life, what we're trying to do is to perfect God's flow. God created a world. God created a world, and now I have a seltzer here. All of the divinity that goes into the world, into the ingenuity and everything, and to the physical stuff that's created, that's wonderful. But now it's all dependent on, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to see it as an element that's supposed to help me in living a holy life? And drink it with an understanding that it's not just about my appetite or my thirst, my comfort level, but it's really about me helping to facilitate my own machinery to make this a meaningful day. And this is part of God's gift to me, living meaningfully in God's world. If that's my sense, and I made the blessing before, then I've plugged this into the flow. We're doing good. If not, then God is broken. There's the flow, but it's the end product is not plugged in. And that's what we call, again, the teshuva is teshuva, restoring this wayward world into in the teshuv hay, return the hay meaning that this our final piece, so that we're aligned with what God is giving us and with the divine flow in the world as intended by God. So in the Messianic era, future, the three lower worlds will have risen permanently to the level of Atzilut. Right? Just I don't have to go back to the diagram, but we'll be living a world where we're not misled by the world's shallowness, because we're not seeing a shallow world. We're seeing a world with its divine depth. And the union between Zeir Anpin and the full will be constant. And we're not going to be disconnected. So all of that's going to be solved. Just as the union between Abba and Ima is now. Abba and Ima means mother and father, but those are the Kabbalistic terms for these two, Chachma and Bina. That's because Abba and Ima means what are Abba and Ima? They propagate. Mother and father propagate. So our thinking, our ideas, and our contemplation propagate and spawn feelings and actions. So, and those are within the divine. We say that we can't impact that. We're not. It's really, these are, even in right now, that flow is exactly as God intended it to be. The question is, does it come lower? Hence, the majority of sacrifices will be obsolete, so we don't need to do that anymore, because most of the offerings are to align the universe. The universe is going to be aligned. But the purpose of the Thanksgiving offering, in contrast, is to acknowledge the preeminence of the spiritual levels higher than it's supposed to be. As I mentioned before, real gratitude, when we talk about it, is not only thinking about what someone has done for you, but about who they are, beyond what they've done for you, beyond what you can even understand about them. That is, in a sense, when we bring a Thanksgiving offering, we're pointing and we're aiming for God's keter. This means a crown. And in other words, higher than the normal flow of function. And that would be to a person who matters a lot to us also. Someone to whom we're close. Yes, they're helpful, they're cute, they're all of those things, but then there's the them beyond the definition. And that's where this keter goes. And that's what the Thanksgiving it goes. We're thankful for God, not only for what God did for us, but for who God is for us. So whereas the all of this alignment is really important to us for the divine flow in the world, and our offerings and our prayers are meant to repair things that are out of whack here. Thanksgiving is not about repairing the system, it's about going straight for God, the system maker. And therefore, in the times of Mashiach, we don't need the system's going to work fine. We don't need the offerings. The purpose of the Thanksgiving offering, in contrast, is to acknowledge the preeminence of the spiritual levels higher than Atzilut, particularly God's transcendent creative light. So I'm not going to get to that. But in other words, like the subconscious, thereby infusing the union of Abba and Ima. I say that the Abba and Ima, those first two, the Chacham and Bina, they're in fine shape right now also, but they also can get a new burst of energy. The subconscious can give a new burst of energy even to our conscious thinking, if we want to use that as the metaphor. And this process will continue in the Messianic era. So that's why this is a more spiritual way of understanding why the Talmud says that Thanksgiving, while the other offerings will cease, the Thanksgiving offering will not cease. Okay? Having said that mouthful, we'll get, unless there are any questions, we'll get to more details of the Thanksgiving offering. So I'm going to read through these 4 verses, and then maybe we'll go back and we'll pick it apart a little bit. So remember, there's going to be a meat element to the offering, and there are loaves in the offering, breads of different types. 10 breads of 4 different types. From these 40 loaves, page 47, verse 14, he must bring one of each type of bread offering as a raised offering of God, for God. But rather than being burned up on the altar, they must be given to the priest who dashes the blood of the peace offering upon the altar. These 4 loaves will be his to eat. The other 36 loaves are to be eaten by the offerer and his party. The flesh of the thanksgiving offering, too, is to be eaten by the offerer and his party, except for the portion specified for the altar and the priest. The flesh of his thanksgiving peace offering may not be eaten before his blood has been applied to the altar. They're bringing in things that are inferred by the verse. It's not going to be as relevant to us, to our understanding, but they belong here. Then it must be eaten during the day it is offered up or the following night. It's the day and the following nights. They're different. Sometimes it's for 2 days. It's a limited time. Eat it today and finish it off by tonight. You must take special care not to leave any of it over until morning. The same time restriction applies to the loaves brought with the sacrifice. Although this time restriction generally applies only to sacrifices of superior holiness, the fact that it is here imposed on the Thanksgiving peace offering does not elevate it to this category. It remains a sacrifice of lesser holiness, which may be eaten by non-priests and may be eaten anywhere within any of the 3 camps or later within the temple city. Whatever is left over on the next day must be burned up. Number 16. But if his offering is not a thanksgiving offering, but just a regular peace offering, brought to fulfill a sacrificial vow or a sacrificial dedication, no accompanying loaves are required because it's in the same type. It's a peace offering. It's I love you, God, but it's not Thanksgiving per se. Then we don't need the loaves. And maybe on the same day he offers up a sacrifice. In addition, what is left over for him may be eaten on the next day as well until sunset. If it's not Thanksgiving offering, it can be eaten the next day too. Thanksgiving is that day. However, what is left over from the flesh of the sacrifice on the 3rd day must be burned up in fire. If nonetheless it is not burned up, or even if the offerer or his party eats some of the flesh past the prescribed time limit, this does not invalidate the sacrifice. Similarly, the flesh of any offering that was not eaten or cannot or will not be eaten within its prescribed time must be burned up. However, whatever is left over from the flesh of the offering on the 3rd day must be burned up in fire. If nonetheless it is not burned up, or even if the offerer or his party eats some of the flesh past the prescribed time limit, this does not invalidate the sacrifice. Similarly, the flesh of any sacrifice that was not eaten or cannot or will not be eaten within its prescribed time must be burned up. And the final verse on this page that we're going to deal with, in contrast, even when the peace offering is slaughtered, the slaughter articulates his intent that some of the flesh of his peace offering will be eaten on the 3rd day. In other words, his intent was off. The offering will not be accepted by God. Intent matters. And it will not count for the one who offers it. Rather, it will thereby become contemptible, and the person who eats it will bear a sin and will suffer excision, meaning die prematurely, even if it does not actually eat the flesh of the peace offering on or after the 3rd day, but eats it all within the prescribed 2-day limit. The same rule regarding a Thanksgiving offering will be given later. Okay. So now, just to try and boil this down to what for our lives that we can use for our lives. The focus here is on a Thanksgiving offering, and because there are similar offerings, those are brought also into the verses about the distinctions. So, inside the why some of the classic commentaries note why the Thanksgiving offering was limited to a 1-day exercise. So one of our medieval greats, Don Yitzchok Abarbanel, who was a great leader and leader not only in the spiritual sense but in the political sense. He lived through the Inquisition. He was banished with the Jews. He could have stayed because he had a lot of money and a lot of clout with the government. He had been treasurer to Don Alfonso of Portugal, but he chose to leave with his brethren, and he writes very, very poignantly about his experience having to leave behind a life that he had built up in country, both Spain and Portugal, that he had worked hard and successfully to lead, and now he was being expelled. So the Barbanel writes, that was just some historical context. The Barbanel says, why was it limited to 1 day? He said because in a case of Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving is a person is feeling grateful to God. So it's important. Thanksgiving can be infectious, and it's feeling grateful to God, feeling gratitude is really a cornerstone of a Jewish mindset. So what he says is, a person goes home, they've got meat, they've got breads, they have 2 days to eat it. So the likelihood is they'll be able to manage that with their family. If they have 1 day to eat it, they're going to have to invite friends. And we want them to invite friends. We want them to invite friends to include them in this gratitude motif. It's good for them, it's good for the community. And so his lesson there is that when we feel grateful, it's okay to share. And in truth, there is a practice, a long time Jewish practice, when someone has gone through something very serious. They make something called a su'udat hoda'ah, a celebration, a meal of Thanksgiving, and invite family and friends. It's not to celebrate themselves. It's to spread the idea that we are blessed. We have God with us. And we have a God who is, whether we recognize it or not, is always giving to us. But again, it's not only about what the giver gives, but about who the giver is. So it's to emphasize the beauty of the gratitude, the beauty of what we have to feel grateful for. There are others who also point out that every day we have new miracles happening to us, again, whether we recognize it or not. And therefore, the Torah wanted to if there's a day of expressing gratitude, that's just today. Tomorrow there's going to be something new. And yesterday there should have been something else. Maybe not something that you technically have to bring an offering for. But to keep our minds focused and say, and not just say, I am blessed, I'm grateful to God because of one thing that happened in my life. It's a daily thing. And that's our prayers guide us that way. From the when we wake up in the morning, to recognize the gifts of hearing, seeing, ability, and all those things, and then think about our personal lives and say, something, God is good to me. I've got challenges. I want to work on those challenges. I want to try to ask God to help me with those challenges. I'm not saying life is perfect, but that's the idea that the fact that we have challenges should not obfuscate or negate the idea that we also have blessings. Just to finish off as far as those verses, then we'll do the closer look here, is that just like, as I said, the offerings are mirrored by our prayers. Here the offering said, there's a thought that's out of sync with the prayer, with the offering is not to be brought. Now our prayers are not just about us saying things. Prayers are about spiritual, mental connection, emotional connection. That's what it's about. And the words should guide us there, and the words are what we express. But the heart of the prayer is not about saying prayer, saying words. The heart of the prayer is about the connection we feel to God. And therefore, it's, ideally, our prayer is supposed to be very focused. And we have minds, active minds, and it's not easy to focus, unless you're sitting in a lotus position doing breathing exercises. But that's really an important struggle, to be able to keep our focus and our minds on the prayer, on God, on the relationship, and not about what I'm going to do when I'm done with the prayer, or what something that happened yesterday, which is natural. It's absolutely a natural thing. But we want to try and keep, just like the blessing had to be with focused, there it was very serious, with focused thought and intent. We want to keep our prayers also within that ballpark. So let's go to a closer look. It says in 15, we said the person has to take special care. Based on this nuance in the phraseology of the verse, the sages decreed that the Thanksgiving offering be eaten by midnight following the day it was offered up. This is something that's a classic in the Talmud as an example of how we have to be careful to guard ourselves from making mistakes. And the idea is that if we brought an offering now, and I'm allowed to say, to eat the offering until tomorrow daybreak. I got plenty of time. The sages said, no, eat it up till midnight. Now, if the Torah says I have until tomorrow morning, who are the sages to come and tell me that I should eat it by midnight? And the answer is that the sages that's what the point of the sages, to legislate and help us not make mistakes and leave room for error. Mirroring that, the sages tell us that when we recite the Shema at night, we recite the mitzvah is to recite the Shema once during the day, once at night. What is night? From nightfall until the next daybreak. But Jewish law is to say Shema by midnight. Why? Exactly because of this. And this is what's brought. It's mirroring this. Is that we want to leave ourselves room for error. If you have a plane at 10, you don't want to show up at 10. You want to show up at, you want to be there by 10 to 10, leaving room for error. Okay. And number 16, a vow or dedication. A sacrificial vow is a promise made to offer up. This is just a legal differentiation, which I think we can understand. There's a different thing. Let me just put it this way. If I said I'm okay, if I made a pledge that I'm going to give $1 to the American Cancer Society, I have to give $1. If I made a pledge to God that I'm going to give this $1 to the American Cancer Society, I can't just give $1. I have to give this $1. So I have to be careful with what we say. So a sacrificial vow is a promise made to offer up a specific type of offering, an assent offering or peace offering, but not a sin offering or guilt offering, which can only be obligatory, not voluntary. A person says, I'm going to bring this offering. I'm going to bring a burnt offering. You got to do it. Which animal? You work that out. The bookkeeping is yours. A sacrificial dedication, and that's what they're translating it, is saying that this animal is the expression of the intent to offer up a specific animal as a sacrifice. Thus, if the animal with which the person intended to fulfill his promise dies or is stolen, a substitute animal must be offered up in its place only if the promise was a vow, not if it was a dedication. If I said, I'm giving this $1 to the American Cancer Society, and they put it down, I walk out and someone stole it. But technically, I can't fulfill my vow. There's nothing I can do. It's terrible, but I didn't do it. Someone stole it from me. But I don't have to replace it. If I said I'm giving $1 and this is it, well, on this stone, so I have to take another $1. But it attaches, when we attach it to a specific physical object, and that object for some reason has been taken from us, then technically we're just in a place where we can't fulfill our vow. So let's just move on to 48. A little bit. It says the 19, the flesh of a peace offering that touches anything defiled must not be eaten. It must be burned in fire. If something defiled touches only part of the flesh, it defiles all the flesh, and none of it may be eaten. In contrast, if part of the flesh of the sacrifice was taken out of the area in which it's required to remain, meaning this is for sacrifices of superior holiness, the precincts of the tabernacle for the sacrifice of lesser holiness, the Israelite camp, thereby being rendered unfit for consumption. The rest of the flesh which remained within the prescribed area remains fit for consumption. Anyone normally qualified to eat this flesh and was not ritually defiled may eat this flesh. Whereas the flesh of assent offerings is not eaten at all, and the flesh of offerings of sin offerings and guilt offerings may be eaten only by priests. With regard to the flesh of peace offerings, anyone who is not ritually defiled may eat the flesh. So let's just go to 19 at the bottom. We'll be able to squeeze this in. 48 all the way at the bottom on the right. Sacrificial flesh that touches anything defiled must not be eaten, must be burned in fire. If it touched something that was impure. According to the sages, one of the reasons the foul meat must be burned is that other people not confuse it with permitted meat and inadvertently eat it. We're very big on that in Judaism because we know that people are not always conscious or focused or aware, and you want to keep people away, not put stumbling blocks before the blind, to use Torah language, right? If I have arsenic in my house, I'm not going to leave it out on the counter, and then probably not even if it's labeled. I'd be really careful. I will put up guards to be able to make sure no one makes a mistake. Well, the same thing should be if I have unkosher food in my house. So, in other words, if we are certain that we will not eat, use, or even touch the meat, we must burn it up so that others will not come to transgress. I'm not suggesting to burn it. I'm just suggesting be careful. Torah here, this demonstrates how deeply we ought to be concerned with our fellows' safety and the pains we ought to take to spare them any wrong. As we see here, God himself instructs us to destroy his holy offerings completely so that no one be adversely affected by it. And that's it's a demonstration of how much we should be caring about other people's welfare, whether or not they care about it. So leave that over here. Questions? Have them. If not, I wish you a great week.
Thank you.
Okay, be well.